Wonderful pivot back to Something Like Gravity, because I've got more questions for you about this book, and I want to make sure we talk about it as much as we possibly can. So obviously, my next question is, Amber Smith, have you ever seen a flying saucer? Do you believe in them?
Ooh, good question. Have I seen one? I'm not really sure. Do I believe in them? Yes, I do, absolutely.
Okay, I think there's a little bit of maybe a bit of a story there. How are you not sure? How close to not sure are you?
Well, when I was a kid, so my dad was in the military and we lived really close to the army base. And so there were always, different aircraft flying around close by. And I think when I was little, I thought everything was a UFO. Because some things would look really strange, actually, but so I still don't really know.
Well, I just assume since Something Like Gravity ends with an alien invasion, spoilers, that no, we won't talk about the ending, but you can rule that one possible ending out. That one doesn't happen.
That would be quite a plot twist.
So with Something Like Gravity, did you well, let's talk first about writing a romance, because I'm always wanting to know what tips do you have for esteemed audience, for other people out there who want to write a romance, other than read Something Like Gravity, see how it's done right, and then do everything that Amber Smith did, but add the alien invasion at the end. Then you're on fire. What tips do you have for writing a romance? What's the secret?
Well, it's funny. When I started writing this book, I wasn't actually thinking of it as a romance. So the book is told in the alternating points of view of Chris and Maya. And originally, I had conceived of these two characters as the protagonists of their own separate books. So Chris was dealing with coming out as transgender, processing some, traumatic stuff that he had gone through, trying to figure out how to navigate the changing relationships with his friends and his family and, pretty much everything in his life. And Maya was dealing with this terrible loss of her older sister, who she had a really complicated relationship with, and it was making her really question her own identity. So those two stories, when they're separate, are really, really heavy.
Were they ever gonna touch over or have similar points, like a shared universe, or was it just gonna be strictly separate originally?
No, they were completely separate. And I think I was working on them at the same time, and at a certain point, because I like to sort of hop around when I'm writing. If I get stuck on one thing, I try not to sit there and dwell on it. I'll go and move and to work on something else until I can get unstuck on the other thing. But with these two,
that's an excellent tip. Does that get you over writer's block anytime that might come up?
Yeah, it really does. It really does. Except for with these two. So it ended up that I just hit a wall with both of them. And this was, as we were talking earlier a little bit about the political climate, I was doing this when there was a lot of really things going on that were making things seem very scary and uncertain. And I just found that I wasn't really able to work on these two stories as I had envisioned them, because there's a whole lot of other stuff going on in the real world that was way heavier than my fictional worlds. So I decided at a certain point I wanted to give Chris a love interest as a way to kind of bring in some light into the story and some little spark into his world. And so as I started thinking okay, well, like, what kind of person would be good for Chris? And my first thought was, oh my gosh, it's Maya from the other book. And then my next thought was, wait, and Maya would be perfect for Chris. So, I don't know. It's funny that I was working on them at the same time, started them at the same time, and it took me so long to realize they were actually meant to be part of the same story. And so I started working on what would become something like Gravity, and it really moved naturally away from focusing on the struggles of Chris coming out and the struggles of Maya grieving to really focus on this relationship and this love story.
When something like that happens, it always feels, to me at least, when something lines up that like I didn't see originally and I should have because it was right there the whole time, and then it comes together beautifully. It feels almost like magic. So what are your thoughts on this? Is this your subconscious working quietly while your front brain is working on the day in day out of writing, or is there a muse somewhere in your writing office just whispering to you?
I don't know. Maybe it's a little bit of both. Yeah, I don't know. I often will I think the subconscious is really, really powerful. And often it's when I'm kind of like you were talking earlier about really loving to go on walks, and like I meditate. I like going on walks too to clear my mind, and I always find it's when I'm not actively thinking about something that the ideas start coming to me. So I often will wake up, in the middle of the night from a dream, and I'll write down a thought that I have, things like that. I mean, I think there is something to that. I don't quite know what it is, but yeah, it's really great when you find these little moments of serendipity that just it makes it feel like it was truly meant to be.
It does. It to me that's part of the juice. That's part of what keeps me going with writing is
Mhm.
those magic moments along the way that, oh, I'm still kind of the same dumb guy I was before I started the novel, but the novel's not dumb. Somewhere in there, something great happened, either within me, through me. Somehow it got on the page, and look at this! Isn't that cool?
Yes. Yep, exactly.
Not a question, just a shared excitement for your discovery. Um, but a couple of questions I did have. At what point did you decide that alternating points of view was going to be the best way to tell this story? And also, with that, what does that allow you to do that
Mhm.
telling the story from just one of the characters' perspectives wouldn't allow you to do? So, two-parter.
Ooh, okay, that's a good one. Um, so this is the first time I've ever written anything in a multiple perspective. And I really I don't know. I felt like this was going to be a really complicated relationship, and we wouldn't be able to get the full picture from just one person's side of things. Um, so I don't know. I just from the beginning I knew it was going to be both of their voices. And maybe that's because their each voice was so well formed in my mind before I started weaving their stories together into one book. Um, but yeah, I think what was really nice with this book, writing from the two points of view, I feel like anyway, or I hope that we could get a lot more empathy when we're seeing kind of the big picture from each point of view. Um, because if we see things from only one perspective, it might be very skewed, and you can often think the other party is, not I don't know. It's easy to kind of put people into boxes, whether it's in real life or characters, when you don't have that level of compassion or understanding about what someone's really going through. And with characters who are going through things as deep and complex as Chris and Maya are going through, I really wanted to have that that close narrative voice with them.
And I love that we're getting two somewhat heavy stories to start us off. I mean, there's quite a bit of humor between Chris and his dad and the aunt. I loved all of that stuff. But there's, we're teasing out this terrible thing that we know has happened to Chris, and sort of the isolation that he's feeling. Maya's sister Mallory has died. And we're dealing with all that heaviness within there. And then, small spoiler, but it's not a spoiler if it happens in the first 50 to 75 pages. This is a long book. But then we get this wonderful meet cute where Chris almost runs Maya over with the car. It's like, oh, that's where we were headed. Okay, romance, good times. It's not going to be all dark. And let me ask you about Mallory, because I was so curious, because there's, the sister has to die. There's any number of wonderful ways to kill people. I prefer zombies myself. Those aren't available. Many illnesses and other things. And you chose a sudden death, just suddenly dead there at school. How did you come to that choice? And why was that the best way to take Mallory out of the story from the myriad of other options that you choose? Or was it something that just always was and you discovered it as you were writing, and that just was what happened, so you had to go with it?
I wasn't sure in the beginning how Mallory had died. But when I was originally writing Maya's story, it very much revolved around this relationship between the sisters. And so I had to really pull back on Mallory and the details of what happened. And I thought of this sudden death where it's not a spoiler because I think we find out in the first few pages, her sister had recently died from this very obscure heart condition that nobody knew about. And there were no warning signs. So I decided to write that part of the story because when I was young, probably maybe 12 or 13, there was a family friend. So they were not my friend. They were only a couple years older than me, so they were a kid too. And they died in this way. And even though I wasn't super close with this person, their death always kind of haunted me in a way, like the silence of it, that someone could just be here one moment and then gone the next. And I don't know. I mean, that always really made an impact on me. And to this day, I mean, this is now it's like 25 years later. And, I still think about this girl and her family and just thinking like, how do you move on from that? And so that's really where Mallory came from. And a big part of Maya's story is about me, trying to answer that question. How do you move on when a life can just end suddenly for no apparent reason?
And of course, the existential question of if that can happen, if that can, what are any of us doing if that can suddenly just take us out of play like that?
Yes.
Why am I saving for retirement? Let me ask you also about another technique that you employ in the story is we know that something very bad has happened to Chris. And we don't necessarily know that I don't think we know that it's a full out assault. I did because I read the description of the book before I read the book. But I don't remember if it's explicitly stated. We get kind of these flashes. We get him on his bike going to the place where it's going to happen. We get the introduction of the characters for quite a bit. And that's put off. So what does putting off the details of that allow you to accomplish, as opposed to putting it just as a note at the start of the story? Hey, this happened. Now we're moving forward to what's happening now.
Yeah, good question. So I think with Chris's assault that happens, before the book begins, there were kind of two parts to that I felt really strongly about. So the first one was, if this is going to be a love story, I didn't want to just put all of the details on the front end of what happened, because it's really traumatic. And the other part of the reason why I sort of wanted the details to kind of filter through slowly throughout the book is that Chris is also on this journey of fully kind of understanding the severity of what actually happened. So I think part of it is through, it happened naturally through writing his voice, that he didn't want to think about how bad it was or how bad it could have been. He just wanted to kind of move on. But as we go through the story, it keeps coming back until we as readers, and Chris as a character also has to kind of see the big picture of everything that happened.
Oh, that's a wonderful answer. That absolutely makes sense, because that does clearly demonstrate Chris's his mindset and his thinking about the event. This is why I like to talk to writers who are smarter than I am. Look how much I learn having these conversations. Like, yes, that is what a smart writer does. Thank you, Amber Smith. So another question I wanted to ask you about something like that. Well, let's talk a little bit about the thematic concern, because there is a lot of there's a lot of astronomy talk. There's a lot of talk. Chris has a telescope and spends a lot of time looking at the sky and thinking about how long it takes light to reach Earth. And how some of the stars that are coming to us are already dead, and they've died so long ago that we don't know it because the light's just now reaching us. And that's kind of a theme throughout the book. So without giving too much away, why was that a good, what's the word I'm looking for? Not theme, but motif, a good motif for this story. And how did you come to decide on that?
Well, so I really wanted a way to incorporate in this book kind of some of my own nerdy interests. So I'm a total astronomy geek myself. And the other thing is, I don't know, so I'm not a very science-minded person, but I'm very interested in science. So I tend to take what I learn about science, science-based fields, and sort of, in my mind, they're very artistic and symbolic. And so I wanted to kind of use Chris's interest in astronomy as a way to kind of talk about the way he relates to the world. And I don't know. I mean, I think one of the things I find really profound about astronomy and sort of thinking about the universe is that we're all, everything that's out there came from the same thing. But so we're all connected in this really almost like incomprehensible way. yet we can all still feel so isolated as well. So, I mean, I think that was the big thought that I had about what I wanted to do with all the astronomy stuff. I don't even know if I ended up going that deep in the book with the meaning, but in my mind, that's sort of where, like, the point of view that Chris is coming from. Like, how can we all be so connected and still I feel so alone?
Now, of course, listeners to this show know that part of your interest in astronomy has to be trying to find another one of those flying saucers you maybe thought you saw when you were younger. One more question about something like gravity. I wanted to ask about the parents because I love the parent characters in this book. So I wanted to ask one about it's the same question, but it's another two-parter. Chris's father is very accepting of his transition, almost overly so, really going out of his way to do the best he can, which is preferable to the alternative. Whereas his mom is not at all comfortable with it, and we can see that has impacted their relationship. There's also kind of the odd thing where the dad and the aunt used to date a little bit in high school, but then he moved on and married the sister. So that's going on. At the same time, Maya's parents have this interesting story where they're divorced, but they're still living together years later, and so they're miserable, and her father's hiding out in the basement with this tiny TV until her mother leaves the house. So they've got a bad relationship, and Chris's parents, while not quite as extremely as extreme a bad relationship, it's definitely very strained. What does that bring to their romance, and how does that play out for them, you think?
Well, I really wanted the parents um, to feel real and to feel human. And so, especially because this is a story about a relationship, I wanted to show um, how complicated relationships can be. And so we see different dynamics going on with each set of parents that really inform both Chris and Maya about the kind of relationships that they want to have as well. And I don't know, I'm trying to think of a good way to say this. Well, I think, the older I get, I tend to really look back on my life, and I have a lot more compassion for myself when I was younger and trying to figure things out. And but I also have a lot more compassion for the adults who are in my life. So my parents and relatives and teachers, and because now that I'm an adult, I understand just how much is going on that probably, your children don't know about. And I don't know, I wanted to really illustrate that moment where a young person kind of gets that their parents are also human and flawed, and even though they are flawed and messy, and maybe they've messed things up and they don't know how to do the right thing or say the right thing, that there's still hope, that there's a way to get around whatever. And so, well, I was gonna keep going, but I think I might give away a spoiler, so I'm gonna pivot.
That's the moment in the book where the aliens show up. It's crazy.